Let's talk about something real today, something that hits close to home for many of you: rejection, the pain of feeling unseen, unappreciated, and ultimately replaced. You've been there, right? You gave everything you had, all your love, all your effort, all your care, and yet it wasn't enough. You put your own needs on hold, sacrificed your time, energy, and heart, only to be met with silence, neglect, or indifference. You were there, constantly supporting, listening, and being his rock. You made yourself available, dependable, and reliable. His safe space, his comfort, the person who would move mountains for him. But what did he do in return? He took it all for granted. He ignored your worth, your value, and treated you as if you were just another option, something convenient and replaceable. He didn't see the effort, the love, or the care. Instead, he dismissed you, made you feel small, insignificant, and invisible. And then, when he finally rejected you, it hit harder than you ever expected. That sharp, bitter sting of being dismissed, replaced, and forgotten. Now, you're left with those haunting questions. Was I not good enough? Did my love not matter? The pain becomes all-consuming, filling your mind with doubts and insecurities. You start questioning every moment of care you gave, every sacrifice you made, and wondering if any of it made a difference. You tried talking to him, reasoning with him, begging even. Maybe you cried, pleaded for him to see what he was walking away from. But nothing worked. Not a single word, not a single action could change his mind. He walked away without a second thought, leaving you behind, feeling lost and discarded. But here's the truth, Queens. There's one last move you haven't tried. And it's not a word, not a gesture, but a powerful act of silence. Pure, unrelenting silence. No more texts, no more calls, no more checking in, no more reaching out. It's time to fall completely off his radar. Imagine this. One day, he'll check his phone, expecting your message, your call, and instead, there's nothing. You've vanished. That silence will speak louder than any word you could have said. It will shake him in ways he didn't know he could be shaken, because here's the truth. Some people don't realize the value of what they have until it's gone, and when you stop giving him your energy, he'll begin to feel it. He may act like he's unfazed. He might pretend that your absence doesn't matter, but deep down, he'll notice. Those moments when he expected to hear from you but didn't, they'll start piling up. They'll gnaw at him, leaving him with a sense of something missing, something he took for granted. He'll start to question himself, wonder what went wrong, and struggle to comprehend the void you've created by simply choosing not to engage. For someone who never truly understood your worth, silence becomes deafening. He'll start to feel the emptiness, the absence of your presence. And it's not just about what you did or said, it's about what you represented. You were never just an option. You were a choice, a source of strength, comfort, and unwavering support. And now, he's left to face the reality of what he let go. Here's where your power truly lies. You don't have to reach out of desperation, fear, or a longing to fix what's broken. You've already done the hard part, holding your ground, recognizing your own worth, and choosing yourself over the crumbs of attention he offered. Now, it's his turn to feel the weight of what he lost. So, whenever that urge to reach out surfaces, remember, my silence is my power. It's not about shutting down, but stepping into your strength, embracing your worth, and showing him that you are no longer someone who waits around, hoping for scraps of affection. You are a woman who knows her value, and his regret is his to carry, not yours to fix. At Powerful Stoic, we believe that true strength comes from within, and that silence can be one of the most powerful tools in reclaiming your peace and confidence. If this message resonates with you, hit the like button, subscribe for more empowering content, and share this with anyone who needs to hear it. Together, let's rise above the heartbreak and walk the path of self-respect and resilience. Remember, Queens, your silence is your power. Number 1, it's not a big deal at first. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You brush it off because that's what we do when things start to feel different, when the connection begins to shift. You tell yourself he's just busy, distracted, or going through something. You make excuses because it's easier than confronting the discomfort. It's not a big deal, you think, trying to convince yourself that this silence is just temporary, a passing phase that will soon be replaced by the closeness you once had. You hold on to the belief that if he cared, he'd reach out, so the lack of communication isn't a reflection of you or your worth. It's just a normal ebb and flow of relationships. At least, that's what you tell yourself to avoid the sinking feeling that starts to creep in. You keep yourself occupied, focus on your daily life, telling yourself that you shouldn't dwell on something so small. After all, everyone needs space now and then, right? You convince yourself that his absence is nothing more than a sign of his need for time to sort things out, or that he's caught up in something beyond your control. And so, you don't want to seem needy or clingy because you've learned that chasing someone who isn't fully present only leads to frustration. So, you stay quiet. You hold back. You don't want to appear desperate or too available. Days pass, then weeks. You begin to notice something you didn't before. The silence isn't just a temporary pause, it's becoming a pattern. That voice inside you, the one that once whispered, "It's not a big deal," starts to feel quieter, replaced by something heavier. The doubts creep in, quietly at first, like a fog that you can't see until it's thick around you. The absence starts to feel louder than the presence ever did. You thought you could handle it, but every day without a word feels like another reminder of his detachment. And that's when it hits you. It is a big deal. It's not just about him being busy or preoccupied anymore. It's about the fact that he isn't making the effort. And more than that, you realize he might not care as much as you thought. That's the painful part. You begin to question everything: the love, the connection, the effort you poured into building something real. The silence isn't just a small void. It feels like rejection. Suddenly, all the moments you thought were special begin to feel hollow. You thought his absence was temporary, something he'd soon realize wasn't worth losing, but instead, you start to see that he isn't even trying to come back. What once felt like a minor inconvenience has morphed into a gaping chasm. The silence isn't just something to ignore, it's impossible to ignore now. The longer it goes on, the more it feels like an absence of care, an absence of attention. And no matter how much you tell yourself it's not a big deal, deep down, you feel the weight of it. That little voice telling you to let go gets louder, and it's no longer enough to convince yourself that he's just caught up in life. It begins to dawn on you that maybe, just maybe, he's not thinking about you at all. At first, you thought maybe he just needed some space. You assumed that things would go back to normal once he realized how much you were there, how much you mattered. But now you understand that the space he took wasn't simply about needing time. It was about him stepping away completely. And the longer this silence continues, the harder it becomes to convince yourself that it's not a big deal. The relationship you once knew has begun to shift, and you're left wondering if the person who mattered most even notices you're gone from his life. The silence isn't passive. It's not just a gap that will fill itself. It's a reminder of what's missing, of what he may not even notice is gone. And for you, it becomes more than just a signal of absence. It's a signal that he might have moved on. At first, it was easy to brush it off, but now the truth starts to sink in. The distance isn't something that can be ignored or forgotten. It's a growing void that forces you to confront the reality of his absence. Every day that passes without his reach becomes another reminder that things aren't as they once were. And every attempt to tell yourself it's not a big deal feels weaker, less convincing. The silence grows louder, becoming a reflection of his choices. And whether or not you want to admit it, his silence speaks volumes. You thought you could handle it, that you could endure the quiet and wait for things to return to normal. But now you realize that waiting might not change anything. The silence doesn't wait. It's not a minor inconvenience. It's a growing void, a space that gets harder to fill, harder to ignore. And the more you try to convince yourself otherwise, the clearer it becomes. This silence is telling you more than you ever wanted to hear. Number 2, the quiet realization of change. There comes a point in everyone's life when they start to notice something different, but often they can't quite put their finger on what exactly has changed. It's not a dramatic event or a loud revelation. It's subtle, almost silent. A quiet realization starts to creep in, one that doesn't demand attention but feels inevitable in its persistence. For the person who once cherished the connection they had with you, this realization happens gradually. They might wake up one day and feel off balance. Something feels different, but they can't quite name it. They'll reflect, trying to understand why they feel so disconnected, why the bond that once felt so natural now seems distant. This isn't a sudden shift. It's not a bolt of lightning or a sudden confrontation. It's the slow, almost imperceptible recognition that things aren't as they once were. For them, it begins as an unsettling discomfort. They don't know what's causing it at first. They just feel off, like a puzzle piece that no longer fits. They might find themselves looking around and thinking, where did things go wrong? The connection they had with you wasn't something they had to question or analyze before. It simply existed. But now that bond feels fragile, elusive, as though they're trying to grasp at something that's just beyond their reach. It's not necessarily that they're thinking about you constantly, but there's a vague sense of something missing. Perhaps they'll remember the little things, the moments that used to feel so significant. Maybe they'll find themselves reflecting on conversations, on shared experiences, on the times when they felt truly understood and supported. They might realize they can't recall the last time they felt that level of connection with anyone else. At first, they may not even realize they're mourning something that's already gone. They'll tell themselves that everything is fine, that they're just in a transition period, or that this discomfort will eventually fade. But deep down, they'll start to notice that the comfort they once had isn't something they can find elsewhere. The people around them may change, the scenery may shift, but that sense of closeness, those quiet, meaningful moments, are now gone. This quiet realization isn't born from an active search for answers, but from a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in how they feel. They might look at their phone and wonder why they haven't heard from you, but instead of reaching out, they push it aside, thinking they'll wait a little longer, believing they'll hear from you soon. But the silence they expected never comes. It grows instead, a silent but growing absence. They begin to feel this absence not in grand ways, but in small moments. The moments they used to count on for comfort, support, and understanding are replaced by the void you once filled. They may not realize it immediately, but they'll start to see how much of their life was intertwined with you. Your presence wasn't something they appreciated until it was gone, and now they're left trying to navigate a life that feels incomplete. They might try to distract themselves, throwing themselves into work, socializing with others, or seeking new connections, but none of it feels quite the same. No matter how many people they meet, or how many conversations they have, there's this faint, nagging feeling of something missing. The laughter, the stories, the shared moments, all of it feels shallow, hollow. They'll wonder why things feel so different, why nothing seems to offer the same sense of depth and familiarity as you did. They might convince themselves that they're fine, that these fleeting emotions will pass, but deep down they know they're not the same. They'll notice that the things they once enjoyed now feel empty. They'll realize that the connections they're forming with others lack the depth they once had with you. The jokes, the conversations, the moments that once brought comfort now feel shallow and unsatisfying. And as these realizations pile up, they become aware of the void you left behind. Number 3, the odd habit of checking in. There's something strange about how often we find ourselves checking in. It begins as a simple act of care, something you do because you want to be present, to stay connected, at almost necessary. You want to know how he's doing, what's happening in his life, and whether he's thinking about you too. Checking in becomes a rhythm, a ritual of sorts, a way to stay connected, a way to hold on to the bond you once shared. But over time, something shifts. The habit that once felt like an expression of love and concern begins to feel different. Instead of feeling like a genuine connection, it starts to feel like an obligation, a force of habit rather than something intentional. You find yourself wondering why you're doing it, to keep reaching out. Is it because you genuinely care? Or is it because you're searching for validation, reassurance, or some sign that things are still the same? The odd habit of checking in has a way of creeping in without you realizing it. It starts with a simple text, a message just to see how he's doing, but soon it becomes more frequent. You check in, not busy, when you think he might be alone, when you hope for a response that tells you something you need to hear. You wonder if he misses you, if he's thinking about you. But here's where things become complicated. You're no longer checking in because you truly believe in the connection. You're checking in because you're seeking something, a sign, a response, something to confirm that your efforts aren't in vain. The message is no longer just a message, it's a plea for attention, for a connection that's beginning to feel one-sided. And even if he responds, the replies often feel distant, hollow, as if they're from someone who's no longer fully present. It's an odd habit because it reveals something about your own needs, about the things you're trying to hold on to that may no longer be there. The more you check in, the more you realize that the connection you're seeking isn't as strong as it used to be. The person you're reaching out to isn't responding in the same way, or perhaps they're simply not responding at all. You start to wonder why you're putting yourself in this position, why you're holding on to someone who seems indifferent to your efforts. The habit of checking in isn't just about him, it's about the uncertainty inside you, the fear. Number 4, the annoying feeling of discomfort. There's this strange sensation that seems to creep up when someone starts drifting away, something hard to put into words, but impossible to ignore. It's not always a sharp, sudden pain. It's subtler than that, more like an ongoing itch you can't quite reach. This discomfort isn't something you expected. In fact, you often find yourself questioning its source. Why does it feel like something's off, even though nothing major has changed? Why does it feel like there's this invisible tension hanging in the air? At first, you might try to dismiss it, telling yourself, maybe I'm overthinking. You shrug off the nagging feeling, convincing yourself that it's just a phase, that things will go back to the way they were. You cling to that hope, holding on to the idea that what once felt natural will eventually return. But the more you ignore it, the more persistent the discomfort becomes. This isn't the kind of discomfort that can be easily fixed by a conversation or a simple acknowledgement. It's something deeper, something that lingers, often unspoken. It starts with small moments, small realizations. His messages come slower, his responses more distant. You notice the subtle shifts in his behavior, how he's no longer as present, how his responses seem shorter, less engaged. It's not like there's a clear reason for this, nothing you can pinpoint. But the absence of those once familiar gestures leaves a void, and that void creates discomfort. You feel it too, in the silence that follows. You expected a response, some sign that he still cares, but instead, there's nothing. That silence becomes deafening, a constant reminder that something has changed, even if neither of you is willing to acknowledge it. You ask yourself, what happened? And the discomfort only grows because there's no clear answer. It's frustrating, isn't it? You want clarity, but clarity seems to elude you. The discomfort isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's subtle, nagging, like a low hum that never quite fades away. You start wondering if you did something wrong, if maybe your efforts weren't enough. And while you rack your brain for answers, all you're left with is the quiet realization that things aren't what they used to be. That's the thing about discomfort. It thrives in the space where uncertainty lives. It thrives in the gaps, in the moments when things don't feel right, but no one wants to address it. And the more you try to fill those gaps, the more frustrating the discomfort becomes. You start questioning yourself, doubting your worth, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the connection you thought was there is starting to fade. It's annoying because there's no clear reason, no clear solution. You can't grab hold of it and make it go away. All you're left with is this feeling that you're in between, suspended in a space where the connection once thrived, but now feels hollow. And the more you try to find a way to fix it, the more elusive the solution becomes. But here's the key. That discomfort isn't necessarily a sign of failure. It's a sign of change. It's your mind and heart trying to make sense of something that feels unfamiliar, something that's beginning to slip away. And while discomfort can be unsettling, it often holds a truth we're reluctant to face. The truth that sometimes things are beyond our control. You may feel tempted to grasp at the discomfort, to hold on to it, hoping it will provide the answers you seek. But the truth is, discomfort isn't a solution. It's a signal. It's telling you that something is shifting, that the connection you once had may be evolving in ways you didn't expect. And sometimes the best thing you can do is acknowledge that discomfort, to sit with it, and to allow it to guide you toward what's truly meant to stay. In time, that discomfort will either fade or it will transform into something else. But until then, it's okay to feel unsettled. It's okay to feel the weight of uncertainty. What matters is how you choose to move forward, whether you allow that discomfort to define you or use it as a stepping stone to deeper clarity. Number 5. Looking for you in small moments. It's strange, isn't it? How after everything, the person who once filled your days seems to vanish, yet their absence lingers in the smallest, most unexpected moments. You find yourself looking for them, not in grand gestures or overwhelming memories, but in tiny, everyday occurrences. It's the little things that seem to remind you of them, the way you'd pass by certain places, or the way something as simple as a certain song or smell triggers a memory. You didn't expect to feel this. You thought it would be easier, that the sharpness of loss would fade. But instead, it's these small reminders that seem to persist. Maybe it's the way you reach for your phone, expecting a text that never comes, or how you notice their favorite coffee shop, and for a split second, you wonder if they're there. It's the small things that start to carry weight. Things that weren't significant before now feel like echoes of what you've lost. At first, you brush these moments off, telling yourself they're silly, insignificant, but over time, they become harder to ignore. They feel like breadcrumbs, drawing you back to thoughts of what once was. You catch yourself pausing in silence, wondering what they'd say or do in those very moments. It's not about desperation. It's about the subtle void that refuses to fill itself. You start noticing how certain activities or routines, once so familiar, now feel incomplete without their presence. That walk you always took together? It feels empty now. That song that played in the background of countless conversations. Suddenly, it feels heavier, loaded with meaning you didn't ask for. Even the simplest things, a cup of coffee, a rainy day, a sunset, seem to carry their absence in ways you didn't anticipate. It's as if your mind keeps searching, not out of hope, but out of habit. You wonder if you're seeking closure in these small moments, if they're clues pointing you towards some sort of understanding. But no matter how much you try to grasp for answers, they slip through your fingers. The connection that once felt so real feels like a ghost, barely visible, but still there. And here's the thing, these moments, as frustrating as they can be, aren't signs of weakness or lingering obsession. They're evidence of the bond you shared, a bond that was so woven into your daily life that even its absence leaves a mark. You didn't expect to keep finding traces of someone who's no longer there, but sometimes love leaves echoes long after it's gone. So instead of fighting these small reminders, accept them. Let them remind you of the depth of what you once had, without clinging to them as something you've lost. Because in those small moments, there's a quiet realization. What you shared was real, even if it's no longer part of your present. And with each passing day, those memories become less about seeking them and more about honoring what you've experienced. Number 6. The frustration with new connections. At first, he thought the pain of losing you would fade with time. He believed that filling the void you left behind would be as simple as finding someone new. After all, people do it all the time, right? But here's the thing. He quickly learns that no matter how much he tries, no matter how many faces he encounters, no one seems to measure up to you. The frustration begins to build, and it's unlike anything he anticipated. It starts subtly at first. He meets new people, goes out, tries to connect, hoping to find someone who brings that same sense of comfort, that same spark. He tells himself, maybe it's just a matter of time before I find someone who feels right. But the truth hits him sooner than he expected. None of these new connections feel real, and none of them make him feel the way you once did. He notices things that used to come so naturally with you, like the way they laugh, how they respond, or the way they interact. Everything feels surface level. He'll go through the motions, try to engage in conversations, but something always feels off. They may laugh at his jokes, agree with his stories, but there's a hollow quality to it that leaves him yearning for something more. It's like trying to fill a cup with water that has a hole in the bottom. No matter how much he pours, it's never enough. He thought for a while that he could move on quickly, that there'd be someone else out there who could offer him the same connection, the same understanding, the same warmth. But reality hits him like a wave. No one comes close. No one listens to him in the same way you did. No one truly sees him in the same way. They're not there when he needs them most. Not like you were. The connection he thought he could recreate feels more like a shallow substitute, and deep down, he knows it. He tried to tell himself it was just bad luck, that the right person hadn't come along yet. But the longer the search goes on, the more he becomes frustrated, not just with others, but with himself. Why can't he find someone who makes him feel whole again? Why does everything feel so distant and disconnected? The people around him are nothing like you. They don't understand him, don't seem to care in the same way, and in his frustration, he begins to act out of desperation, hoping that someone, anyone, might come close to filling that void. He might go out more, try to meet new people, hoping that by doing so, he can distract himself, move on, and forget what you once meant to him. But instead, he keeps facing the same disappointment. The spark is missing, the connection is gone, He might even get involved with someone new, someone who seems promising, someone who checks a few of the boxes, only to discover that they fall short. None of them give him the depth, the intimacy, or the understanding that you did. And in this frustration, he becomes irritated, not just at himself, but at the world around him. He thought he could replicate the connection he once had with you, but now he's painfully aware that no one else can match what you brought into his life. He was so sure there'd be someone out there who could make him feel whole again, someone who could offer him the same sense of peace and clarity, but it hasn't happened. Instead, he finds himself more isolated, more frustrated, and more disconnected from others than he ever anticipated. Each failed attempt feels like a reminder of what he lost. Whether it's in conversations, laughter, or just the simple act of sharing moments, none of it feels genuine anymore. Every person he meets seems to fall short, leaving him feeling more detached and empty. The expectations he had going into these new connections are never met, and that frustration only grows. And here's the key: as he continues to seek and fail to find, he begins to feel something far deeper than mere disappointment. He feels the weight of regret. The more time passes, the more he realizes that his connection with you was unique, irreplaceable, and impossible to replicate. No matter how hard he tries, no matter how many people he meets, no one can fill the void you left behind. This realization that no matter how hard he searches, nothing will ever feel as genuine or as real as what he had with you is a bitter pill to swallow. The frustration builds because he now knows the truth, that he let go of something precious, something he didn't fully appreciate until it was gone. And the more he searches, the more he becomes aware of the emptiness in every connection that follows. In the end, he's left grappling with the harsh reality. Some things are irreplaceable. Some connections, some bonds, are too deep to ever be duplicated. And in his frustration, as he continues to look for you in the people around him, he'll come to understand that the only person he's truly searching for is you. Number 7. The unavoidable regret. At some point he thought he could keep moving forward without looking back. He told himself it was just a temporary lapse, a passing phase, and that the emptiness would eventually fade. But deep down, something kept eating away at him. The realization that he had lost something he couldn't quite replace. The absence of your presence became a gnawing, unavoidable weight that he couldn't ignore. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and that silence you gave him became louder and more deafening with each passing day. At first, he might have convinced himself that his life was fine, that the absence of you wasn't as painful as he had anticipated. He tried to fill the void with new people, new distractions, and new experiences, but none of it worked. The shallow connections he created, the surface-level conversations he had, all felt empty. No matter how much he laughed or how much he smiled, there was a hollow feeling that nothing could truly erase. Deep down, he knew he had tried to move on, but what he was searching for was no longer there. The regret begins subtly at first. It's not the kind of regret that smacks you in the face overnight. It creeps in like a slow-burning fire, one that starts beneath the surface and gradually grows stronger. He remembers the times when things were simpler, when your laughter filled the room, when your presence brought comfort and meaning to his life. Those moments, which once seemed mundane and taken for granted, are now the things he aches for the most. Every interaction with someone new is a stark reminder of what he lost. They might meet new people, go out, and distract themselves, but each attempt at connection feels more like a failure. No one understands him the way you did. No one sees him, listens to him, or makes him feel the way you once did. The realization hits him harder than he ever thought possible, that no amount of new relationships, no matter how promising, could ever fill the void left by you. He starts to reflect on all the mistakes he made, the moments he didn't appreciate what he had, the times he chose ignorance over awareness, and the times he dismissed your worth. It becomes a cycle of regret, replaying moments he could have handled differently. The more he tries to move forward, the more he's haunted by memories of you, the way you looked at him, the way you supported him, the way you made him feel seen in a world that often overlooked him. The regret becomes heavier with each passing day. It's not just about the loss of a relationship, it's about the loss of something far more valuable, a deep connection, trust, and a bond he took for granted. He starts to realize that his pride, his arrogance, and his assumptions of having time on his side were his biggest mistakes. Time became his enemy, not his ally. The more time he spent trying to distract himself, the more he recognized how much he missed you. There's a gut-wrenching realization that dawns upon him, the undeniable truth that he pushed you away. He didn't fight for what mattered. Instead, he allowed fear, doubt, and uncertainty to take over. And now, he's left in a world that feels more lonely than ever before. That's the irony of regret. It's not something that comes and goes quickly. It's the slow unraveling of what he thought he could live without, only to discover he couldn't live without it at all. In his quiet moments, when the distractions fade, he's left to confront the emptiness within himself. The laughter, the joy, and the comfort you brought into his life are now replaced by silence. He may pretend he's okay, put on a brave face, and go about his life. But beneath that facade lies the truth that he lost something irreplaceable. The weight of that regret becomes unbearable, not just because of what he did, but because of what he didn't do, what he failed to appreciate and nurture. And here's the crucial part. This regret isn't just about losing you. It's about losing the person who saw him for who he truly was. The person who stood by him through the highs and lows, who offered unwavering support, and who made him feel understood in ways no one else ever could. He let that go, and now the memory of it becomes a haunting presence in his life. As he continues to carry this regret, he might try to reach out, hoping that somehow he can undo what has been done. But deep down, he knows that some things can't be undone, some wounds can't be healed, and some losses are simply permanent. The regret he feels is a reminder of the choices he made and the choices he didn't make that led him to this point. For you, this is the moment to remember your strength. You've already taken the hardest steps. You've let go, moved forward, and found your own sense of peace. Whether or not he reaches out doesn't define your worth. Your power lies in knowing that his regret is his to carry, not yours to resolve.